So here we are picking up with the Lakota, and they are our Plains Indians tribe. They lived in the central United States, the interior of the United States, Great Plains region, area known for its dry grassland. And you probably have heard about the Lakota before. They were a tribe that you should have studied back in the second or third grade. They are Plains Indians. You might have called them the Sioux, Sioux, and again, like the Eskimo and the Inuit, they prefer not to be called Sioux, so we use the term that they would use, which is the Lakota. They are known for their aggressive behavior. As you move west and as you move into the southwest, drier areas, resources become more and more scarce. So the people there are more and more willing to fight for them. Obviously, being a chief, you gain great respect. This is a war bonnet, the typical headdress of a chief. The more feathers meant the higher rank and the more respect in your tribe. And so again, this was not something they didn't walk around on your average Tuesday afternoon with this thing on. He knew he was getting his picture taken, and so he dressed up appropriately. Central U.S., dry grassland, Great Plains. So the Lakota lives in teepees, and that was because they could be packed up and moved very quickly. They, like the Inuit, were principally a nomadic tribe. They were less nomadic because they could have some agriculture in the Great Plains, but they tended to follow the buffalo herds, and they needed something that could be packed up and moved very quickly. They were made of large poles and animal skins, and women owned the teepees instead of the men. So after marriage, the man is going to move into the woman's teepee. So it was what we would call a matriarchal society, meaning that the property and things were passed down on the woman's side, not the man's, as would be in a patriarchal society. Okay, and you might see different spellings for the word teepee. That's okay. T-I-P-I, T-E-E-P-E-E. Again, you're taking a non-English alphabet and group of sounds and trying to make it in an English alphabet, and so it doesn't always translate perfectly and directly. They were skilled hunters and nomads. They hunted buffalo. They grew corn and beans. So like I said, they had much more agriculture than the Inuit did, but they were still at least partially a nomadic tribe. They hunted by foot, with canoes if they were near major bodies of water like the Missouri River, and eventually by horseback. The Spanish brought the first horses to North America. As the story goes, there was a Spanish sailing ship that was coming across from Europe, and it broke up on the shores of North Carolina, and the horses swam to shore, and they formed the first herds of wild horses in North America. The Lakota Indians and other Indians, the Pueblo especially also, captured those wild horses, tamed them, and used them for labor and hunting. Your Pueblo Indians moving into the Southwest. So here's a picture. Pueblo Indians were great weavers. They're known for their cloth and their just very distinctive patterns on their weaving and on their pottery. Now you would think it would be kind of weird maybe that a tribe that lives in the desert would have all of these clothes, long pants, long sleeves, big woolen coats. But you have to remember two things. It gets very cold at night in the desert, and anything that you would have like this would actually maybe keep you cooler because it keeps the sun from hitting your skin directly. So if you walked around in your bathing suit all day, every day in the desert, you'd get burned up pretty quickly. They're in present-day New Mexico and Arizona, or in other words, the southwest region of the United States. They lived in a desert area with lots of cliffs and mountains. Generally, they traveled by foot, much later on by horseback, okay, after they were introduced in the 1600s. And so here's some of those cliff dwellings that the Pueblo were famous for. They lived in these homes that were called adobes. So Pueblo, the word itself, means village. It's the Spanish word for village. When the first Spanish explorers happened upon these Indians, they saw a village, said Pueblo, and that was the name that stuck for these Indians. And you'll see there are different groups, the Anasazis, the Hohokams, and but we're just going to generally group it as a Pueblo group. This is Mesa Verde. It's a very historical Pueblo village, and they tended to build them back in the cliffs, and that served several functions. Remember, we talked about they were very aggressive tribes because of their lack of resources. So being back in the cliffs like this protected them from their enemies. It also gave them protection from the harsh sun. It served multiple purposes to build back up in the cliffs and mountains. All right. Pueblos are similarly groups of houses that are built next to, on top of another. It's similar to an apartment building. The brick that it is made out of is called adobe, okay, A-D-O-B-E. The village itself is called Pueblo, and the individual units and the bricks that make up that individual unit are called adobe. So the Pueblos are made of adobe, which is a mud brick that's dried in the sun. The Pueblos were, as you see in the picture, very often, but not always, built back into the cliffs or on tops of mountains for protection. As we said, they were very skilled weavers. The Pueblo grew cotton. Certainly that would be preferable to a wool fabric in the desert. They're famous basket weavers. They grew corn, beans, and squash, which are known as the Three Sisters. And the reason that they are is because you would grow the corn first, and then that would form a stalk. Then a little bit later you would plant the beans, and the beans would grow up, on that corn stalk, and so you didn't need to trellis your beans or put a pole in to have your beans grow. The corn did that naturally. And when we say squash, we might mean, like you guys tend to think of a yellow squash, but any kind of squash, zucchini, a pumpkin, a gourd, they would plant that. If you've ever seen those, the leaves of those are really big and they cover the ground. So that squash shades the ground and keeps weeds from growing. So they're called Three Sisters because they each help each other. They form a family. They work together. Okay, corn, beans, and squash. And finally, our Iroquois tribe. And they were located in northeast North America, the eastern woodlands. Now, the Iroquois were not in Virginia. So I get that mistake a lot when we talk about the eastern woodlands, and Virginia is part of that. But the Iroquois tribe were generally north of Virginia. Obviously, with a name like Eastern Woodlands, it's covered with lots of forests. And during the summer, as you guys know, the climate was very similar to ours. So hot, warm in the summer, and cold and snowy in the winter, even more so the farther north that you go. Okay, you can see the Iroquois, like the tribes of Virginia, built a longhouse, which tended to be a multi-family dwelling, and very, very tall. You can see, there's the door, and it goes on up probably double the height of the door. And that was so that when you had cooking fires in these structures and you had a layer of smoke near the ceiling, you weren't walking with your face in all this smoke. The smoke cleared up to the ceiling. It probably hovered there for a while, and then there were vents in the roof to let it out. They lived in long houses made of wood because wood in the woodlands is the resource you have. And so you guys know, similarly to the tribes of Virginia, they had the corn and beans, and they would very often use a fish to put that down in the ground with the seeds, and the fish would act as fertilizer. They hunted deer and bear. Now, here's the clue on this one. So, if it's deer and bear together, it's the eastern woodlands. If it's just hunting deer, you have the forests of the Pacific Northwest. So, that's a little clue for the test there. Deer and bear together always mean the Iroquois and the eastern woodlands. The Iroquois hunted by foot. They fished by canoe, as the other tribes did. The one outlier there, as we said, was the Inuit tribe that had a closed-top canoe because they were in that Arctic water. And so one more time, you can kind of see our map here. So the Arctic region here is going to be your Inuit tribe. The Pacific Northwest is going to be your Kwakiutl tribe. The Southwest is the Pueblo. Then your Great Plains here in the central United States are going to be your Lakota or Sioux. And over here, number 5, is your Iroquois in your eastern woodlands. So that's our 5 tribes. And I'll take some of the videos from this. I can't show you a video within a video. It messes up. And I will link those, embed those into your Schoology page for you. All right, take care. Do a little bit of studying. I'll put some study links on there for you, and you can practice some of this, and you'll do great.